If you were hurt by the only relative you have in the world and lost your best friend, what would you do? Our protagonist, Jimmy, has just experienced such an ordeal. Fortunately, he still has a female friend, Kim, who is willing to help him, and they have a somewhat ambiguous relationship. Kim is now the only person he cares about, because Jimmy initiated the Sandpiper crossing case. Kim recommended him to the prestigious DM law firm, and they were very happy to have Jimmy join their firm to work on the case. For Jimmy, who has always wanted to work at a big law firm, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. However, just as he was preparing to accept the offer, he hesitated. Jimmy touched the ring left by his good buddy Marco and decided to live a different way. Then Jimmy arrived on time at the agreed location, and they first exchanged some polite business compliments. After that, Jimmy asked Kim to talk in private. He hemmed and hawed for a long time, implying that if he accepted the job Kim recommended, it would mean their relationship would progress further. Kim made it clear that the two things had no relation at all. Hearing this, Jimmy felt relieved. He politely declined Clifford's offer. Then Jimmy left the parking lot, leading to his conversation with Mike from the end of the last season. Jimmy decided to break his previous rules and no longer try to please others deliberately but to follow his own feelings. Jimmy went to his office at the nail salon. Seeing Mrs. Nguyen's cucumber water, he wanted to sneak a sip, but as usual, Mrs. Nguyen stopped him. Jimmy put down the cup, looked at Mrs. Nguyen, then decisively swung his tie, turned on the faucet, and drank directly from it. Everyone was stunned. This also marked a new beginning for Jimmy. Jimmy then went to his office. After entering, he didn't forget to tear down his sign, because he didn't want to work or be a lawyer anymore. Now, he just wants to rest and do things he likes and is good at. Even when clients called, he directly refused. Kim thought Jimmy was having a midlife crisis, but to Jimmy, it was a midlife awakening. Kim asked him why. If he had such an awakening, he wouldn't take such a good job. Jimmy told her to put on a swimsuit and listen to his explanation in the pool, but Kim wouldn't indulge his bad habits and said she would wait for him at the bar for a limited time. Jimmy might ignore others, but Kim still had him under control. Hearing Jimmy say he was giving up the legal profession and seeing him order the most expensive sapphire gin in the hotel, Kim thought he had lost his mind. She ordered the cheapest drink for Jimmy. Kim thinks Jimmy's abnormal behavior is related to his recent long trip, but Jimmy explains it's because of Chuck. For the past 10 years, he has been working hard to gain Chuck's approval, but in the end, it was all a ridiculous farce. Jimmy believes that his miserable life started when he began studying law, and now he wants to abandon the profession and start anew as himself. Because he is good at persuading others, he doesn't necessarily have to be a lawyer to achieve that. Kim thinks that Jimmy shouldn't easily give up the lawyer's qualification he worked so hard for over the years, but Jimmy says that's his sunk cost, and he can't let it influence his future plans anymore. At this moment, a stockbroker in the lobby is talking loudly on the phone, directing his subordinates to trade, as if the place is his office. Jimmy can't stand it anymore and decides to take this opportunity to show Kim his skills. He takes Kim to Ken and says that he and his sister have a bet about whether there is a limit to stock investment and if they can use inheritance for investment. And since they heard him talking about it professionally, they wanted to ask. Kim stands silently by, watching Jimmy perform. Jimmy pretends to be a stock novice consulting Ken, and he hints that they have an inheritance of over $1 million they want to invest. With such a lucrative opportunity handed to him, how could Ken refuse? Ken first uses a few cases to prove that he is a money-making machine. Then he invites Jimmy and Kim to the next table for a few drinks while he teaches them how to make detailed investment plans. But what Ken doesn't know is that the best hunters often appear in the form of prey. Jimmy makes up a fake name to fool Ken, and Kim follows suit with a fake name too. Ken, eager to secure these two big clients, finds it natural to buy them a few drinks. Jimmy hints that he only drinks sapphire gin, the same bottle Kim just stopped him from ordering. Kim sees what Jimmy is up to and doesn't stop him but instead cooperates tacitly with Jimmy. The waiter pours the entire bottle into 3 glasses and hands Kim the exquisite stopper as a souvenir. Fans of Breaking Bad know that Gus used sapphire gin for his revenge in Mexico as well, and this stopper also has deep meaning in the show. With a glass of top-notch sapphire gin downed, the deal is signed smoothly. After Jimmy and Kim leave, Ken is still basking in the joy of closing the deal, but when he sees the bill, he is instantly dumbfounded.
Hey. What is this right?
Yes, sir. It is.
This is the consequence of being ostentatious in public, but Ken has no awareness of his bad habits, and later in Breaking Bad, he steals Walter's parking spot. In the bank queue, he is still chattering away, only to be severely taught a lesson by Walter. Having succeeded, Jimmy and Kim hurriedly run out, and Jimmy immediately discards the fake contract he just signed. Kim experiences the thrill of breaking the rules for the first time, finally understanding Jimmy's true intentions. Their relationship thus takes a further step. After a night of passion, Jimmy, who didn't bring a toothbrush, asks to borrow Kim's, but she refuses. To the audience's surprise, Jimmy directly uses Kim's finger as a toothbrush. This display of affection catches everyone off guard. Then Jimmy picks up the stopper from the sapphire gin bottle and tells Kim to keep it well, as it is now a token of their relationship. Jimmy muses how wonderful it would be if Kim could go crazy with him like this every day. Kim says that while it is exciting, they can't do this all the time. She checks the time and says she's almost late, so she hurriedly prepares to go to work. Jimmy, still a bit reluctant, is now left to sunbathe by the pool, being currently unemployed. When he gets bored, Jimmy leaves a voicemail for Kim, hoping she can chat with him when she's free. Just after making the call, Jimmy instinctively spotted a target, so he immediately called Kim again to invite her to join the hunting party. But this is all just wishful thinking on Jimmy's part, and he knows Kim won't come. To get closer to Kim or to have more topics to talk about, Jimmy comes up with another idea. He changes his mind and decides to join the DM law firm that Kim recommended. When Clifford, the boss of DM, learns that Jimmy is coming, he personally welcomes him and introduces him to all the employees. Obviously, they all express their welcome to Jimmy. Moreover, Clifford prepares a luxurious private office for Jimmy and even provides a company car for him. Jimmy feels a bit uncomfortable with such excellent treatment. Omar asks Jimmy if he has any other requests, and Jimmy hesitantly asks if the desk can be replaced with one made of rosewood. To his surprise, Omar immediately agrees to handle it. At this moment, Jimmy sees a switch with a label that clearly states always on do not turn off. Normally, people wouldn't touch such a switch, but Jimmy decides to do the opposite. He first checks to see if anyone is watching, then secretly peels off the sticker and turns off the switch. Although nothing visibly changes, this foreshadows that Jimmy will approach his upcoming work and life in an unconventional way.
What the?
When it comes to bodyguards, Mike is absolutely the best. Unlike the gun-toting Sobchak, Mike truly knows how to protect his employer's safety. Even before the operation, Mike had thoroughly investigated the other party's background. He knew exactly what to watch out for in these shady deals. With Mike's escort, Price's first transaction went very smoothly. The two of them established a long-term cooperative relationship, but human nature's weakness often shows after sudden wealth. And Price, having made money, quickly bought a big Hummer. Seeing such a flashy car, Mike turned around and walked away. Price hurriedly reversed and chased after him. Mike said that when doing business, one should keep a low profile. If you want to make a deal, take my old car. However, Price didn't take Mike's advice. He thought it would be a waste not to show off his new car. Seeing that Price had no intention of changing his car, Mike stood his ground, refusing to get into the flashy vehicle. Price got angry, saying, "Fine, don't get in. You haven't done much anyway. Just standing there and taking money easily. Besides, Nacho has been coming alone recently. If you don't come, I can save on the bodyguard fee." But Mike still advised him not to go to the transaction alone. However, Price saw this as Mike begging him to be taken along. Price underestimated Mike.
All right then, your services are no longer needed.
So Price drove his flashy Hummer to the deal alone. Soon, Nacho arrived in his old van. Seeing that Mike wasn't there, Nacho asked tentatively if Mike was injured or on sick leave. Unexpectedly, the simple-minded Price told the truth, saying they had parted ways due to differences of opinion. The shrewd Nacho clearly saw that the reason Mike didn't come was because of the high-profile Hummer. Nacho requested to admire Price's new car, and the unsuspecting Price readily agreed, proudly introducing the car's various features. While Price was counting money in the back, the cunning Nacho opened his glove compartment and saw the vehicle's registration information, thus obtaining Price's exact address. But Price had no idea about the severity of the situation. The next day after work, he found his home ransacked and hurriedly called the police for help. According to Price's description, besides losing some cash, the most unacceptable loss for him was his treasured collection of baseball cards. Based on the police's understanding of his profession and the Hummer parked outside, They suspected that Price's money was dirty. While Price was printing the list of lost baseball cards, the police noticed that the area behind the sofa could be a hiding place for contraband. They moved the sofa and indeed found a hidden hole behind the baseboard. Using a flashlight to inspect, they found it was already empty, indicating that those things had also been looted. The scene shifts to Mike, who is on duty at the parking lot. He suddenly notices the water in his cup shaking. Thinking it's an earthquake, he looks up and sees that it's Price arriving in his Hummer. Mike immediately has a bad feeling. Seeing an old acquaintance, Price quickly greets him. Finding out that Mike works here, Price marvels at how small the world is. Price asks Mike to confirm if this is the police station parking lot. Sure enough, Mike's intuition was correct. This guy has gotten himself into trouble. Mike tells Price to pull over, saying he has something to discuss with him. After some questioning, Mike, a former police officer, concluded that this was a fishing expedition, and the reason the police suspected Price was because of the Hummer. But to Mike's surprise, Price is taking such a risk just to retrieve his baseball cards. Mike advised Price to go home, telling him that the losses were just the cost of doing business. However, Price insists on going to the police station because those baseball cards were left to him by his late father, and he swears to get them back. Hearing this, likely out of empathy for family, Mike agrees to help Price retrieve the baseball cards. Mike tells Price to go home and not have any further contact with the police. Mike did this because if Price was arrested, he would be in trouble too. Mike knows exactly who stole the baseball cards. He goes to an auto detailing shop and says he wants to change his car's upholstery to leather. Manuel called in his son to help. The man who came out was Nacho. Seeing Mike, Nacho's heart skips a beat, but he pretends they haven't met before in front of his father. Seeing Mike's old beat-up car, Manuel thinks it's not worth changing to leather seats. He recommends some cheaper fabrics and asks his son to try to convince Mike. Then Manuel goes back to his work. One has to say, Nacho's father is a very honest businessman, which sharply contrasts with Nacho's personality. After Manuel leaves, Nacho asks Mike how he found him. Mike smiles knowingly and doesn't answer. Then he gets straight to the point and demands Nacho return the stolen baseball cards. He tells Nacho about Price calling the police and that the police already suspect Price of engaging in illegal activities. If things escalate, both of them will be in trouble. But Nacho is unconcerned, confident he can avoid police scrutiny. Just as Nacho was about to leave, Mike, who has come prepared, advises him that he'd better listen to himself. Nacho thought Mike was going to threaten his family and he was ready to fight him, but to his surprise, Mike's trump card isn't Nacho's family but his boss, Tuco Salamanca. If Nacho doesn't do as Mike says, Mike will expose the shady dealings Nacho has been doing behind Tuco's back. This puts Nacho in a tight spot, and he immediately returns the baseball cards to Price. As a condition, Nacho will take the Hummer and dispose of it to avoid unnecessary trouble. Mike also gets a payout from this. As they leave, Nacho stops Price, announcing that their business is over. After this incident, Price finally understands Mike's importance. Just when he thinks everything is fine, the police call again. What would happen when a retired Special Forces soldier engages in a battle of wits with a crime boss?
The hell? Let go! Let go! Let go! Let go!
Even if he's beaten bloody, Mike doesn't dare let go of Tuco, because his goal is to wait for the police to come and arrest Tuco. But why is Mike doing this? The story begins a few days earlier. Mike helped Price retrieve his stolen baseball cards and earned a $10,000 reward. He made this money entirely to support Stacy and Kaylee. He gave all the money to Stacy. Although Stacy thanked him, Mike's keen eye noticed that she was troubled. An anxious Stacy said she heard gunshots the previous night and was scared all night. Mike asked Stacy if she had called the police. Stacy said the police didn't help much. Hearing this, Mike decided to stay the night to protect them, but Stacy insisted it wasn't necessary. Reluctantly, Mike stayed in his car overnight, secretly guarding Stacy and Kaylee. Although a suspicious vehicle appeared behind him during the night, Mike later realized it was just a newspaper delivery car. The next morning, Mike saw the neighbor receive their newspaper and left feeling reassured. He hadn't heard the gunshots Stacy mentioned, but as soon as Mike arrived at work, Stacy called, saying there was an emergency and asking him to come over. When Mike got to his daughter-in-law's house, Stacy showed him a hole in the wall, saying she heard gunshots again last night. Stacy thought the marks on the wall would prove her story, not realizing that Mike had stayed outside the house all night. Mike now understood why Stacy didn't want him to stay. She needed to cover up her lie. But Mike didn't expose Stacy. he realized her intention was to move to a better house. Out of his son's indebtedness to them, Mike promises to get them both a new house as soon as possible. Hearing this, Stacy, having achieved her goal, finally left. The scene shifts to Mike, who, while appearing to take his dog to the vet, is actually seeking another high-risk, high-reward job from Caldera. But at the moment, all Caldera has is a $200 bodyguard gig for Mike. Though the pay is far from his goal, Mike doesn't refuse. After all, some work is better than none. But to Mike's surprise, that evening Caldera offers him a highly paid job, and the client specifically requested Mike. Hearing this, a cash-strapped Mike rushes to the designated meeting spot. The client is none other than Nacho, who says he needs Mike's help to kill Tuco. The next day, Nacho details his assassination plan to Mike, including the specifics of collecting debts with Tuco. But Mike quickly spots the flaws in Nacho's plan and asks why he's so determined to kill his partner. Nacho explained that Tuco was a madman, becoming even more violent, especially after using illegal substances. If he suspects his partners, he kills them without hesitation. Nacho pulls down his collar, revealing scars. He tells Mike about a guy Tuco suspected and then shot in the head, with fragments of the man's skull embedding in Nacho's flesh because he stood too close. Nacho says that if Tuco wasn't killed, he will eventually discover Nacho's side business, which would be a death sentence, so Nacho wants to eliminate Tuco as soon as possible. Hearing all this, Mike thought that using a sniper to assassinate Tuco would be the safest approach. Based on their previous encounters, Nacho believed Mike had the skills for this. Mike asked for $50,000, and Nacho readily agreed. Then Mike went to the arms dealer to choose a weapon, but Mike couldn't find a suitable one, so he decided to change his mind and not bring a gun this time. To apologize, Mike offered to pay the dealer a running fee, but the dealer promptly refused, saying he relied on repeat business and to contact him next time if needed. In the storyline, this is the same man who later sold Walter the machine gun he used for his revenge. Mike contacted Nacho again, stating that killing Tuco wouldn't solve Nacho's fundamental problem. If Tuco died, the Salamanca family would surely investigate, and they would both face serious consequences. Mike suggested a more moderate approach that wouldn't result in Tuco's death but would still get him away from Nacho. The scene shifts to a shiny new sports car parked in front of a taco shop. The car belongs to Tuco, who is inside collecting payments. The man handing over the money is Crazy 8, who previously appeared in Breaking Bad. At this point, Crazy 8 is still very young and lacks the swagger he had when he threatened Walter with a gun. Right now, he is facing the fierce and intimidating Tuco. In Breaking Bad, Crazy 8 mentioned that his father owned a furniture store called Tampico, where Walter had bought a crib. Crazy 8's appearance in Better Call Saul confirms his story since his uniform and the car bear the Tampico logo. It seems Crazy 8 is making deliveries for his father while making some side money. After Crazy 8 left, Tuco took out a small bag of illicit substances and sampled it with his pinky finger. That's what set the stage for his crazy antics. Seeing his chance, Mike, from outside, makes an anonymous call to the police, reporting an armed man threatening someone. Hinting at gang activity, Mike gave the exact address to the police. After hanging up, he wiped all his fingerprints off the public phone. Then Mike drives to the taco shop and parks, intentionally scratching Tuco's beloved car. Tuco, who had been watching his car, immediately starts cursing, pretending nothing happened. Mike enters the shop to buy a meal. Tuco approaches him and tells Mike he hit his car, but Mike feigns ignorance. Nacho also chimes in to back Tuco up. Seeing both men accusing him, Mike reluctantly apologizes but shows no intention of resolving the issue. At the checkout, Mike intentionally let Tuco see that his wallet was full of cash. He did this to provoke Tuco into demanding compensation. When Mike leaves the shop, Tuco and Nacho follow, with Tuco demanding Mike stop. Tuco told Mike to look at the scratched paint on his car, saying that if it wasn't taken care of, Mike wouldn't be allowed to leave. Mike told him to get a pen and leave his contact information and he would get the insurance company to take care of it. Tuco didn't care about insurance. He just wanted cash because he knew the old man had money in his wallet. He demanded that Mike hand over his wallet, but Mike refused. Seeing that Mike was adamant, Tuco reluctantly revealed the gun tucked into his waistband. Playing along, Mike reluctantly hands over his wallet. Tuco grabbed the wallet and saw there was $400 inside, enough to fix his car. Just then, Nacho heard distant police sirens and urged Tuco to leave quickly, but Tuco wasn't done yet. He told Nacho to take the money and go, while he would stay and deal with the old man. Nacho quickly fled. Tuco, who had the money, didn't intend to pester him any further, and said that if the police hadn't been coming today, he would have taught him a good lesson. However, as Tuco was about to leave, Mike grabbed him. Tuco pulled out his gun to threaten him, but Mike knocked it out of his hand. Seeing the sirens approaching, Tuco attempts to break free by brutally beating Mike, but he underestimates Mike's resistance to a fight. Mike didn't fight back even though he was beaten black and blue, enduring it until the police arrived to catch Tuco in the act. Seeing that the police were already approaching, the frantic Tuco gave Mike another punch. Later that night, a bruised and battered Mike met with Nacho because the police witnessed the whole incident and found Mike's wallet in Tuco's pocket, along with a gun bearing Tuco's fingerprints on the ground. It was enough to keep him in prison for years. By choosing not to kill Tuco, Mike only received a payment of $25,000. Nacho questioned Mike why he went through all this trouble to frame Tuco and ended up getting beaten like this. After all, he could have easily taken $50,000 and gotten rid of a piece of trash at the same time. But Mike looks at Nacho with his one eye and doesn't give him the answer he wants. So, what do you think made Mike change his mind? What started out as a serious meeting became an opportunity for them to have a private conversation. There were similar scenes in Breaking Bad. This is because the protagonists, once they experienced the thrill of breaking the rules, became increasingly addicted to these activities. It was their inability to control this desire that led them down an increasingly narrow path in life. To have more interactions with Kim, Jimmy accepted DM Law Firm's generous invitation against his own will. The firm's benefits were excellent, and Jimmy's expected income was very ideal. He even began discussing buying a house and getting married with Kim. They were looking forward to a beautiful future. At this moment, Jimmy suddenly remembered he had to go to the nail salon to pick up the Mercedes-Benz the firm sent him. Hearing this, Kim couldn't help but feel envious, but she was still happy for Jimmy. She even gave Jimmy a beautifully wrapped gift. It was a mug with the words "World's Second Best Lawyer" printed on it. This parallels an episode of Breaking Bad where Jesse and Walter first go out to the countryside to produce contraband. Jesse made fun of Walter for being number 2 in the world. This mug would also become an important prop in Jimmy and Kim's relationship. Bidding farewell to the Suzuki that had accompanied him for many years, Jimmy switched to the brand new Mercedes-Benz provided by the firm. The customers at the nail salon eyed Jimmy's luxury car with envy, and Mrs. Nguyen at the door couldn't stand it and told them to go back inside. Seeing Jimmy's smug look, Mrs. Nguyen refused his attempt at a farewell hug. Jimmy then got into the car and was overjoyed by the luxurious interior. However, when Jimmy opened the sunroof, he probably remembered his dark history with that sunroof incident in Chicago and quickly closed it. The only thing that displeased him was that the cup holder couldn't fit the mug Kim gave him. Ignoring this, he hurried off to work. At DM Law Firm, Jimmy reported his work progress to his boss, Clifford. He discovered that the documents submitted by Sandpiper Crossing's defense attorney indicated that the unfair allowance plan was voluntarily chosen by the clients, but according to Jimmy's statistics, all the clients chose this option, which seemed more like a mandatory condition. Jimmy suggested using this point to refute the opposition but needed some facts to support it. Clifford agreed with Jimmy's idea and asked him to follow up on the case as soon as possible. Since the Sandpiper Crossing case was large in scale, DM Law Firm was partnering with HHM Law Firm on it. This allowed Jimmy and Kim to sit in on meetings together. Jimmy, as a key player in the case, reported the recent work progress at the meeting. Just then, a staff member suddenly walked in with a storage box. Jimmy had a bad feeling. The staff member reported the situation to Howard, who then interrupted Jimmy's presentation and asked everyone to place all electronic devices in the box. It was clear that Chuck was going to attend the meeting, because prior to this, Howard had visited Chuck, informing him about Jimmy's work at DM Law Firm. Since both firms were collaborating on the Sandpiper Crossing case, the clients only wanted to deal with Jimmy, so Clifford brought Jimmy on board. Chuck reluctantly admitted that Jimmy was indeed good at handling interpersonal relationships, but he wondered if Clifford didn't care about Jimmy's work and educational background. Howard said he was very objective in telling Clifford about Jimmy's experience, but Clifford didn't care about that and gave Jimmy the status of a partner to distance himself from helping Jimmy. Howard claimed that Kim put in a lot of effort on this matter. Howard did this to protect his firm's interests and avoid conflict with his partner Chuck. Secretly recommending Jimmy to join DM was also a move to quickly resolve the Sandpiper Crossing case and bring benefits to the firm. Hearing this, Chuck, who was in the mood to play the piano, now stared at the metronome in deep thought, deciding to make a comeback. On the surface, Chuck was there to observe the progress of the case, but in reality, he wanted to overshadow Jimmy. Sure enough, Chuck's arrival completely disrupted Jimmy's train of thought during his presentation. Chuck's look seemed to be waiting for Jimmy to make a fool of himself. Kim noticed Jimmy's concern and placed her hand on his thigh for encouragement. With Kim's support, Jimmy quickly regained his composure and succinctly reported his recent work, even making everyone laugh with his humor at the end. After the meeting, Chuck took the initiative to greet Jimmy. This was the first time the brothers had spoken since their fallout. Jimmy asked Chuck why he was there, and Chuck proudly said that his name was on the building. Chuck seemed to be asserting his sovereignty. After Howard leaves, Jimmy continues to ask Chuck what he's doing here. Chuck said he wanted to witness certain things firsthand. The usually humorous Jimmy had nothing to say. Just then, Jimmy's phone call interrupted their awkward conversation. It was Mike calling because Price's troubles hadn't been resolved. The police were onto this ordinary citizen with a big Hummer to solve Price's problem and protect himself. Mike asked Jimmy for help. The scene then shifted to Jimmy accompanying Price to the police station for questioning. Faced with the police interrogation, Price stumbled over his words. Afraid of giving the police any incriminating evidence, Price said he had hired a private investigator to recover his baseball cards, so the case could be closed, and the police could focus on other things. But the police weren't ready to let it go because they discovered a hidden compartment under Price's couch, making them believe he was definitely up to something. Seeing the situation clearly, Jimmy decisively asked Price to go out, and he dealt with the police as Price's personal legal advisor. Jimmy got straight to the point, saying, "You're only here to help my client because you discovered the hidden compartment under his couch." Jimmy acknowledged that it was normal for the police to suspect Price but assured them that Price hadn't done anything illegal. Hearing this, Salerno questioned why Price was sweating if he hadn't done anything wrong. At this point, Jimmy began to orchestrate a story. He subtly hinted that Price used the hidden compartment to store some private art pieces. Salerno was puzzled about what kind of art needed to be hidden so discreetly. Jimmy explained that it was part of a transaction between Price and a wealthy individual. Price provided personal videos, and in return, he received financial support. However, the relationship soured, and the other party took Price's videos and baseball cards, similar to how lovers quarrel and then reconcile. Salerno assumed it was explicit adult content. Jimmy denied this, saying it was merely a fetish video with no illegal content and that everyone in the video was fully clothed. Hearing this, the police were even more puzzled and asked what exactly was involved. Reluctantly, Jimmy said the client referred to it as squat cobbler. This left the officers utterly confused, as they had never heard of such a thing. Jimmy elaborated further, explaining it in a way that made it sound like something normal people would find hard to accept. The police were astonished that this seemingly ordinary guy would be involved in such activities. After resolving the issue, Price admired Jimmy's resourcefulness, but for safety, Jimmy needed Price to cooperate and record some squat cobbler videos to satisfy the police's inspection. That evening, Jimmy shared a few boxes of cakes with Kim, recounting the day's events and how he defended Price. They chatted and laughed until Kim realized the cakes were props for Price's fetish video. Seeing Kim stop, Jimmy quickly explained that these were extra props for the video and assured her they had never been used. However, Jimmy misunderstood Kim's concern. She was worried because Jimmy had fabricated evidence. As a lawyer, being caught fabricating evidence could cost him his career. Jimmy insisted it wasn't a real case and that he did it for free. Kim was even more baffled and asked why Jimmy would do such a thing. Jimmy said he was just helping a friend. Kim said, "It seems this friend of yours must be so important that you're willing to risk losing your job by fabricating evidence." Not wanting to explain further, Jimmy said it was over and no one would find out. Kim warned Jimmy that he was playing with fire and that it would eventually backfire. But this was the kind of thing Jimmy excelled at. Kim sternly told Jimmy never to do it again, and Jimmy hesitated. Seeing Kim's serious expression, Jimmy reluctantly agreed. "Do you think he'll listen to Kim?" A tour bus driving down the road suddenly pulled over, and the driver lied, claiming the bus had broken down and needed a quick repair, asking the elderly passengers to wait a moment. However, as soon as the driver opened the hood, Slippin' Jimmy, who had been waiting, walked over and handed the driver a bill. The driver gave him only 5 minutes. This was more than enough for the smooth-talking Jimmy, because all the passengers were clients of the Sandpiper Crossing nursing home. To quickly get their authorization, Jimmy found a shortcut to success. With his humorous and charming speech, he quickly built rapport with the clients. It's undeniable that Jimmy was an absolute genius in sales. In the end, he achieved his goal, with all the elderly passengers cooperating with Jimmy to submit their claims. In just 3 short weeks, Jimmy managed to secure over 200 clients, earning high praise from Clifford. Everyone listened intently to Jimmy's progress report, except for Chuck, who questioned Jimmy's methods. He thinks that Jimmy's ability to get so many clients in such a short period of time is likely to lead the defense to suspect Jimmy of abetting. Jimmy denied this, but Chuck insisted he just wanted to know how Jimmy would explain it if it came up. But this couldn't stump the clever Jimmy. He effortlessly made up a lie that sounded like the truth to everyone else. However, Chuck knew exactly what kind of tricks Jimmy was up to. Jimmy noticed that Kim seemed upset, so they had a private conversation, but Kim didn't respond to him. Jimmy realized the seriousness of the issue and then interrupted the others to express his agreement with Chuck's viewpoint. He'll do the rest of the work in a different way to avoid the suspicion that he's abetting the client. After saying this, Jimmy quickly glanced at Kim, hoping for her forgiveness. After the meeting, Kim was still upset, and Jimmy hurried after her. Kim asked Jimmy to tell the truth. Jimmy said he just did what needed to be done and achieved excellent results. Apparently Jimmy didn't realize his mistake and was risking disbarment by doing what he did. Kim warned him not to handle work this way again, because Kim had vouched for him at DM law firm. If Jimmy did anything inappropriate, it would affect her as well. When Jimmy returned to DM law firm, Omar reported that none of the letters they sent to over 200 clients had received a reply. Clearly, Sandpiper Crossing Nursing Home had intercepted the letters. Jimmy quickly devised a counter-strategy. After work, Jimmy stopped Clifford, who was about to go home, and reported his suspicions to him. Not only that, but Jimmy also provided a solution, using TV ads to get the information to the clients. Moreover, Jimmy had already figured out the TV programs that Sandpiper Crossing regularly played for their clients. Jimmy was confident in this plan, but Clifford mentioned that they had tried advertising a few years ago with disappointing results. However, he didn't completely dismiss Jimmy's idea and said they would discuss it next week. Jimmy asked Omar to play their previous ad, which turned out to be just text and narration with the highlight being a wavy effect. Jimmy exasperatedly asked what kind of ad that was and where the performance was. He decided to make the ad his way, so Jimmy called in the college students he had previously worked with in film. With his natural directing talent, Jimmy arranged the script for the ad, expressing exactly the effect he wanted, aiming for the best outcome at the lowest cost. Because the company hadn't approved the ad, Jimmy had to pay for it out of his own pocket, and the actors were clients he had previously helped. After shooting the ad, Jimmy showed the final cut to Kim. He asked Kim to pretend to be a Sandpiper Crossing client and give genuine feedback on the ad.
My husband and I scrimped and saved for so many years. We did our best to build a nest egg so that we wouldn't be a burden to our family. After Ronald passed, I moved to an assisted living facility, a nice place. They told me they'd take care of everything, but then one day they said all my money was gone. How could that be? Where did it all go?
That's not a real tear, is it?
If you or a loved one
It's
is a resident of a Sandpiper Crossing facility or other associated retirement community, you may be eligible to receive compensation. For a free consultation, call the law offices of Davis and Maine at 505-242-7700. That's 505-242-7700.
After watching it, Kim was highly impressed with Jimmy's professional directing skills and said if she were a client, she would call for more information, but Kim misunderstood Jimmy's intention. She thought the ad had already been approved by Clifford and was surprised by it. However, Jimmy didn't correct Kim's misunderstanding. The next day at work, Jimmy hesitated about whether to take the ad to Clifford for approval. He went to Clifford's office door but turned back. Jimmy decided to act first and get approval later, so he called the TV station's ad placement department and had Omar urgently send the ad over. During the wait, Jimmy appeared anxious, worried about the ad's effectiveness. The picture on the wall of a man slipping hinted at Jimmy's fate, just like the painting Walter often saw in Breaking Bad. It symbolized Walter drifting away from his family. Jimmy had Omar ready with a plan to handle the incoming calls, and then he waited in his office for the ad to air. When the call didn't come in, Jimmy began to work his usual magic. Sure enough, Jimmy's ad worked, and colleagues began receiving calls from Sandpiper Crossing clients one after another. However, in the evening when Jimmy and Kim were watching a film at home, Clifford called. Jimmy expected Clifford to praise him, but instead, Clifford was furious. Clifford was extremely unhappy with Jimmy's actions and demanded that he bring the ad to his office first thing in the morning. After speaking, Clifford angrily hung up the phone. Jimmy didn't want Kim to know he had been scolded, so he pretended to have a cheerful conversation with Clifford for Kim to hear.
Golden boy.
That's me.
However, Jimmy didn't realize that trouble was looming. Jimmy never dreamed that the creative advertisement he painstakingly filmed, despite achieving great results, would ultimately anger Clifford due to his unauthorized actions. Moreover, their mindset couldn't accept this kind of advertisement. The partners at DM believed Jimmy was bringing shame to their law firm, so they voted to fire him. Fortunately, Clifford decided to give Jimmy another chance. From now on, Jimmy's actions would be under strict supervision. Jimmy suspected that Kim might be implicated, so he hurriedly called her, but it was too late. At that moment, an oblivious Kim was being reprimanded by Howard. Hearing that Jimmy had acted out again, Kim neither defended herself nor criticized Jimmy's actions. Instead, she admitted to having seen Jimmy's advertisement. Howard blamed Kim for not reporting the advertisement to him, which led to their law firm being criticized by their partners. Seeing Chuck's expression as if someone owed him money, it was clear that unless Jimmy and Kim were punished to his satisfaction, Chuck wouldn't let it go. Having been unable to reach Kim all day, Jimmy hurried to HHM to apologize to her, only to find her office empty. After inquiring with the cleaning staff, he learned that Howard had demoted Kim to the bottom tier. Reviewing documents, Jimmy admitted that he didn't inform Kim because he thought Clifford would accept his proposal after seeing the advertisement's results. Feeling he had implicated Kim, he wanted to confront Howard, but Kim had already warned him not to do so. As she had vouched for Jimmy at DM, Kim willingly accepted Howard's punishment. Jimmy still wanted to confront Howard, but Kim stopped him.
No! I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. If you go to Howard, you and I, we're done.
So we're not done now?
I need this job. And there's a weekly billing quota that I'm about 40 hours behind on, so could you please just go?
Hearing this, the helpless Jimmy had no choice but to leave dejectedly. Next, he went to Chuck's house, believing that Chuck had instigated Howard to punish Kim and was ready to confront him. However, Chuck was lying on the sofa, shivering under a space blanket, because every time Jimmy did something disgraceful, it triggered his illness. Jimmy added another layer of the space blanket on Chuck and told him to drink some water and rest. Jimmy thought he would wait until Chuck woke up to have a proper discussion with him. So, Jimmy sat there the entire night. The next day, when Chuck woke up, Jimmy questioned him about why he had punished Kim. Chuck claimed to know nothing about it and shifted all human resource decisions onto Howard. Having suffered from this himself, Jimmy accused Howard of being Chuck's puppet. Chuck, not backing down, retorted that if Howard listened to him, he wouldn't have recommended Jimmy to DM and guessed that it was Kim who persuaded Howard to recommend Jimmy to DM. Therefore, Howard was so angry that he demoted Kim. Jimmy told Chuck to take it out on himself and not on Kim. Chuck mocked Jimmy for overestimating his importance, saying Kim was paying for her own mistakes because she hadn't considered her firm's interests and didn't stop Jimmy from independently airing the advertisement. Hearing this, Jimmy revealed to Chuck what Kim hadn't confessed. Kim was innocent. She didn't know I aired the advertisement without Clifford's permission. Chuck stated that Kim did not defend herself by claiming ignorance. Jimmy explained that it was because Kim didn't want him to be embarrassed. Chuck believed that Kim's trust in Jimmy was her biggest mistake. Hearing this, Jimmy lashed out at Chuck, feeling he hadn't committed any serious wrongdoing. It was just an advertisement, and it only aired once. Jimmy reiterated that the advertisement's results were excellent. Hearing this made Chuck furious. He pointed out that Jimmy's biggest problem was focusing solely on the outcome's quality, not caring about the correctness of the process. He believed Jimmy had broken the rules and turned Kim into an accomplice. Seizing on Jimmy's mistake, Chuck took the moral high ground and harshly lectured Jimmy. He was also surprised that Clifford hadn't fired Jimmy. Their previous fallout was because Chuck didn't want Jimmy to be a lawyer. Jimmy negotiated with Chuck, saying he could give up being a lawyer, but he demanded Chuck revoke Kim's punishment. Obviously, Chuck wasn't swayed by Jimmy's line of thinking.
You help Kim, I quit the law. Is that a deal?
I didn't say that.
No, you didn't say it, but that's what you want, right?
Because if I were impeding the career of one of my employees for the purpose of compelling you to do something against your will, that would be extortion.
Yeah, it would. So, you gonna extort me, Chuck? You get her back in her office, out of doc review, everything back to normal, and I quit the law for good. No more Jimmy McGill Esquire, poof, like he never even existed.
You want me to commit a felony?
Come Come on down, Chuck. Roll around in the dirt with me. All your dreams will come true. Go on, do it. Go on.
I am not the bad guy here.
Chuck stated that if Jimmy wanted to destroy his career, it would be easy and wouldn't require his intervention. Jimmy just needed to make a few more mistakes. He also kindly reminded Jimmy that he was going to be late for work if he didn't leave soon. After arguing for half a day, Jimmy didn't get the result he wanted and instead received a severe scolding from his brother. Do you think Chuck was right this time? What happens when you cross a mob boss? Although Mike was beaten to a pulp, he successfully got Tuco sent to prison, earning a handsome reward. He also managed to help Stacy move to a higher-end community, fulfilling her wish. However, what Mike never expected was that he would attract the attention of Tuco's uncle, Hector Salamanca. Hector found Mike at a restaurant and engaged him in a very polite conversation. Hector scolded his nephew Tuco for being immature and disrespectful to the elderly. He admitted that Tuco, with his violent temper, deserved to go to jail to learn a lesson, but an 8-year sentence was unnecessary. Hector asked Mike to go to the police and change his testimony, admitting that the gun was Mike's and that Tuco only got fingerprints on it by taking it from his pocket. Mike responded that this would get him charged with illegal possession of a firearm. However, Hector bluntly pointed out that since Mike was a former cop, the authorities wouldn't trouble him. Clearly, Hector had come prepared, having thoroughly investigated Mike's background. Hector promised to make Tuco apologize to Mike and offered Mike $5,000 as a reward afterward. After stating his terms, Hector told Mike to think it over. It seemed things were about to get complicated, and Mike would have to prepare his countermeasures. When Mike got home after work, he found Hector's men already waiting for him. They were there for Mike's answer. Stubborn as always, Mike wasn't about to bow down to anyone easily. He'll only compromise with his family. After Arturo left, the ever-watchful Mike began setting up his props. He took out some mats and other items he had bought from the supermarket and naturally placed the mat at the front door. This way, anyone who came by would leave a trace. As Mike expected, when Mike came back at night, there were footprints under the mat. He drew his gun and cautiously opened the door. Once inside, he didn't find any intruders, indicating they were hiding. Mike then turned on the TV to create the illusion that he was home, waiting for his chance to strike back.
For crunchy coleslaw. Tap again.
In no time, Mike subdued the two men.
What's the message?
Take the 5,000.
It took two guys to tell me that.
We were just supposed to scare you, that's all.
You try harder next time. Get out. Get out!
After driving them away, Mike washed the blood off his hands. He also showed a normal person's reaction. His hands were uncontrollably shaking. This was a threat from the Salamanca family, foreshadowing even greater trouble for Mike. Sure enough, it wasn't long before, while Mike was playing with Kaylee by the pool, he spotted two men on a distant rooftop with hostile intentions. They were Tuco's cousins. The cousins, and Marco gestured as if shooting at Mike and his granddaughter. Mike gritted his teeth in anger. He hadn't expected them to threaten his family so quickly. It was clear he couldn't avoid this problem any longer. He would have to confront it head-on. He went to Hector's base of operations, the ice cream shop. Nacho pretended not to know Mike and frisked him. After confirming there were no listening devices, Nacho reported that Mike was carrying a gun because it was on his own turf. Hector indicated there was no need to confiscate Mike's gun. Also present were the cousins and Arturo, who was brutally beaten up by Mike. This time, Hector commanded Mike to go to the prosecutor's office the next day and change his testimony, but Mike demanded $50,000. Hector declared there would be no payment, and if Mike didn't comply, the cousins would pay a visit to his daughter-in-law and granddaughter. But Mike wasn't intimidated by his words. He knew Hector's goal was to get Tuco out of trouble. If Mike didn't help, Hector wouldn't achieve his goal, so Mike prepared to stand his ground. If there was no payment, they would go down together. Barefoot is not afraid of the shoes. Mike not only has good hands but also has a very good psychological tactics. In the end, Hector compromised with Mike.
50,000. And the gun is yours.
In the evening, Nacho came over to deliver money to Mike. Nacho's goal was to warn Mike to keep their secret. Mike feigned ignorance, acting as if he didn't know what Nacho was talking about, and returned the previous $25,000 to Nacho. Nacho was puzzled as to why Mike did this. Mike explained that since he couldn't help Nacho solve his problem, he should return Nacho's money in full. This was Mike's code of conduct. It was this principle that made Mike the most reliable character in the show. Meanwhile, a guilt-ridden Jimmy came up with another bad idea to help Kim. He suggested that Kim sue HHM to defend her rights. Clearly, Kim wouldn't do that. Even if she won, no law firm would be willing to hire her afterward. Hearing this, Jimmy reluctantly said he would quit DM, believing that's what Chuck wanted, so Kim wouldn't continue to be punished. However, Kim's rebuttal left Jimmy speechless.
I dig myself out of this hole. You do your job, Jimmy. And don't insult my intelligence by saying you are doing any of this for me. You don't save me. I save me.
Kim decided to leverage all her connections to find clients in order to make up for her mistake. She made call after call but didn't land a single client. Although disappointed, she wasn't discouraged. She continued making calls one after another. In the garage, in the bathroom, in the conference room, she lost count of how many calls she made. However, when someone gives their all, luck often favors her. Finally, Kim secured the big Mesa Verde Bank case through a friend named Paige. To welcome this important client, Howard and Kim together received the representatives from Mesa Verde Bank, and their conversation was very pleasant. But to Kim's surprise, after seeing the client off, Howard informed her that she wouldn't be allowed to follow up on the case. This incident made Kim start to question her future at the firm, laying the groundwork for her eventual departure from HHM. That evening, Howard took the Mesa Verde Bank case to Chuck. Chuck, as always, didn't disappoint. Due to his health issues, he couldn't work at the office during the day, so he came in at night to handle the case. Chuck worked through the night until dawn. The light-shy Chuck was suddenly hit by a burst of light. Following the source, he found that it was Kim who had turned on the lamp. Seeing it was Chuck, Kim quickly turned off the lights. Chuck thought Kim had come to work early, unaware that she had been working late and hadn't rested. Chuck asked Kim to make 2 cups of coffee and have a chat. Naturally, the conversation drifted to Jimmy. Chuck talked about their father. Their father was a genuinely good man who ran a convenience store. In his worldview, there was no evil. Jimmy grew up in that store, alongside their father. Despite their father's hard work, the business eventually failed and went bankrupt. When Chuck returned after finishing his studies to help with the accounts, he found over $10,000 missing. Chuck saw Jimmy taking money from the cash box and concluded that Jimmy had stolen the money, but his father didn't believe that Jimmy had done it. Half a year later, their father passed away, and Jimmy cried his heart out. Chuck believed that Jimmy was mainly responsible for this, but he didn't know that much of the money had been given away by their father. The people their father helped were actually exploiting his compassion. Jimmy witnessed all of this.
There are wolves and sheep in this world, kid. Wolves and sheep. Figure out which one you're gonna be.
This had a profound impact on Jimmy's worldview, making him determined not to become like his father, who was easily taken advantage of by others. Chuck admitted that Jimmy was inherently good-hearted, but his biggest flaw was his lack of self-control. After causing trouble, Jimmy always left others to clean up his mess. Chuck's actions were truly infuriating. He had the audacity to badmouth his brother in front of his brother's girlfriend. In the end, Chuck didn't miss the opportunity to gain favor by saying he would plead Kim's case to Howard. If you were Kim, what would you want to say to Chuck? In the remote Mexican borderlands, a member of an illegal organization is leisurely making a delivery. Suddenly, he saw a spike strip laid out in front of him. However, by the time he reacted, it was already too late. Just like that, Jimenez was successfully intercepted by a mysterious figure. When Jimenez got out of the car with his gun to check the situation, someone suddenly pressed a gun to his head. Next, Jimenez was tightly bound. It was Mike. He took out his chainsaw and started cutting the tires of the lorry. As expected, he quickly found what he was looking for. A few days earlier, Mike's daughter-in-law Stacy had taken a liking to a villa, so she brought Mike to take a look at it. In reality, she wanted Mike to pay for it. So, Mike came up with a plan to rob Hector. He went to Hector's ice cream shop at night to secretly observe their every move. Mike would never act unless he was absolutely sure. After identifying Hector's vehicle, Mike began following it discreetly during the day. Hector's vehicle was driven into a warehouse. Shortly after, a box truck arrived and backed in. Then the warehouse doors were discreetly closed. It's obvious they've hidden the money inside. Hearing the sound of changing tires, Mike deduced that the money was hidden in the tires. When he got home, Mike bought a pipe and, with Kaylee's help, drilled numerous small holes in it. Kaylee watched them with a puzzled expression. Kaylee told Stacy that they were making a special hose, and Mike explained that it was for watering the garden. At night, Mike turned it into a spike strip filled with nails. The next day, Mike set the trap on their usual route, running a steel wire through pulleys, then hid in the dark waiting for Hector's truck to arrive. Everything was under Mike's control, and the truck was successfully intercepted. Mike's car was a beat-up vehicle he had bought temporarily because he had no intention of killing anyone. Even if the driver saw the car, they wouldn't know who did it. The episode's title is Nailed, indicating Mike's complete confidence in his plan. But it wasn't over yet. That night, Mike continued to observe Hector's ice cream shop. Upon learning that he had been robbed, Hector flew into a rage, so furious that he had to rely on medication to calm himself down. This was Mike's way of teaching Hector a lesson for threatening his family. Having stolen a large sum of money, Mike didn't forget to do some good deeds to console himself. He had previously comforted his son in a similar way.
Hey, listen up, everybody. This gentleman's buying a round for the house.
The next morning, Mike went to his usual spot for breakfast. He bought a newspaper to see if there was any news about the truck he had robbed, but after going through the entire paper, he found nothing. Then, he received a call from Nacho. The two met at the appointed place. Nacho had figured out that it was Mike who had robbed Hector's truck, because in their line of work, no one leaves any witnesses. From what Nacho knew about Mike, he was certain that only Mike would do such a thing. Nacho came to Mike to confirm how he knew the money was hidden in the tires, suspecting that Jimenez and Mike were working together. If that wasn't the case, and Jimenez had seen Mike during the robbery, Hector might suspect that Nacho was the one who leaked the information. Mike sarcastically remarked that they were overestimating their intelligence and made it clear that he had done everything flawlessly. After receiving a definite answer, Nacho left reassured. However, Mike questioned why this incident hadn't made the front page of the newspaper. Mike wanted the police to pay attention to the case, hoping they might uncover what Hector was really up to. Nacho realized that Mike's aim was to take revenge on Hector. Nacho stated that Hector had long forgotten about Mike, and without any clues, he wouldn't suspect Mike. Nacho was somewhat angry at Mike's actions because if the police found Hector, they would also find him. Nacho prepared to draw his gun to warn Mike, but in the end, he was impressed by Mike's composure. Mike promised that after this incident, he and Hector would be even. Hearing this, Nacho could only leave reluctantly. Mike again asked why the incident hadn't appeared in the newspaper. Nacho explained that they had already cleaned up everything. After Mike left, a good Samaritan found the bound Jimenez and freed him. Later, Hector and his men received information and arrived at the scene. They rescued Jimenez and then killed the good Samaritan, burying him in the desert. That was how they cleaned it up. Hearing this, Mike's doubts were resolved, but he couldn't calm his mind for a long time. As he had indirectly caused the death of an innocent person, it seemed that his grudge with Hector was far from over. On the other hand, Jimmy, who had been scolded by Kim, went back to work diligently. However, Jimmy habitually tried to take shortcuts in his usual manner, but Clifford's secretary, Aaron, stopped him in time. Aaron even wanted to follow Jimmy to the restroom, and while washing his hands, Jimmy ran into Bill, the prosecutor he had dealt with before. Bill, hearing that Jimmy had joined the renowned DM law firm and received top-tier treatment from the company, was envious. Bill, who had spent years in the legal profession to the point of losing his hair, had never encountered such treatment. Seeing that Jimmy, who used to chase after him every day begging for favors, suddenly surpassed himself, Bill was very envious, and when he was leaving, he did not forget to whisper a word of complaint.
Bastard.
That evening, Jimmy returned to the company-provided apartment and watched TV, only to see an advertisement by DM for the Sandpiper crossing case. To Jimmy's disappointment, his ad had been taken down, replaced by Clifford's traditional style. It seemed the firm had seen the impact of Jimmy's ad and decided to continue running advertisements. Although it seemed like the company provided Jimmy with a great platform, they actually had various reasons to limit his development. Jimmy seemed like an outsider. No matter how capable he was, he couldn't outshine Clifford. Even though the company-provided apartment was spacious and comfortable, to Jimmy it felt like a cage that confined him. In the end, he decided to return to the small office in the nail salon he had rented. Though this place was small, it was his own domain, and Jimmy could finally sleep soundly. The next day, although Kim was reinstated in her position, Howard didn't seem to have fully forgiven her, because in the previous episode, Chuck had mentioned he would plead for Kim. It appeared he had actually done so. Kim explained to Howard that she hadn't asked Chuck to speak on her behalf, but Howard, with a stern face, didn't respond. Could this also be an act orchestrated by Chuck? With a stern face throughout, Howard immediately put on a professional fake smile when he was about to meet a client. After meeting the client, Kim quickly adjusted her attitude as well. After receiving the Mesa Verde Bank clients, Kim hurried to court to defend the Sandpiper crossing case. Facing two opponents, Kim did not lose in terms of momentum, although there was no chance of winning the case. Her spirit impressed her opponent, Rick. During recess, Rick caught up with Kim and invited her to lunch. Rick knew a bit about Kim's career and noticed that Howard didn't fully utilize her talents. So, Rick considered inviting Kim to join his firm, and even as a partner, though tempting, Kim didn't immediately accept Rick's offer. After Rick left, Kim sat in the restaurant, lost in thought. Looking at the successful people outside and considering Rick's offer, she realized that switching firms might be her only chance to gain more opportunities. Just as Kim was about to call and accept Rick's offer, the waiter said someone wanted to buy her a drink. It turned out to be the man she had just seen outside. She was surprised that he started hitting on her right after parting with another woman. Kim decided to play along to see what tricks the man had up his sleeve.
I'm Dale, by the way.
Giselle.
Meanwhile, Jimmy was working hard under the supervision of two assistants. Seeing it was Kim calling, Jimmy excused himself, saying it was his elderly grandmother. Kim said she had caught a big fish and needed Jimmy's help as soon as possible. Hearing this, Jimmy couldn't focus on work anymore and rushed to the scene. With the support of Slip and Jimmy, Dale was sure to take the bait, having worked together once before. Jimmy and Kim were very in sync this time as well. Ultimately, their prize was a check from Dale, but Kim wasn't going to cash the check. She was just going to put it on the mirror as a souvenir. Kim told Jimmy about the job opportunity she encountered, and Jimmy supported her decision to switch jobs. He even suggested that Kim bring him along when she went to resign from Howard. Although a great opportunity was right in front of her, Kim didn't seem very happy. She realized that Jimmy took the job at DM just because of her. Hearing this, Jimmy quickly stepped forward to comfort her and listed all the generous benefits he had received. Even though they were insincere words, Kim saw that Jimmy was serious about her. Jimmy encouraged Kim to accept Rick's offer. After kissing goodbye, they each headed to their own companies. Jimmy got into his car, only to have his good mood nearly ruined by the damn cup holder. Frustrated, he took a wrench from the trunk and violently dismantled the base of the cup holder. This hinted that he would no longer adapt to others' rules. Doing what he wanted was the most important thing. Before the trial, Jimmy designed a logo for his law firm, indicating that he already had a plan in mind. After the trial ended, Jimmy immediately contacted Kim to ask if she had resigned from Howard. Kim thought it was a bit too hasty, as she hadn't received an official offer from Rick yet. Jimmy's purpose in calling was to find out about Kim's progress because he was now considering starting a law firm together with her. He wanted to persuade her before she switched jobs. So, Jimmy went to the DM office and asked Omar to help him draft a resignation letter. Omar looked at Jimmy in surprise. The company offered him such good benefits, yet he still wanted to quit. Omar couldn't understand why Jimmy would do this and reminded him that if he resigned voluntarily, he would have to return the signing bonus. Omar clearly remembered that Jimmy's contract was for a year. Hearing this, Jimmy quickly took out his contract to check, and it was indeed as Omar said. Realizing he was being impulsive, Jimmy made an excuse to retract his resignation and asked Omar to keep it a secret. Now he needed to find a way to get Clifford to fire him instead. On his way home, Jimmy happened to notice an inflatable man by the roadside. The comical appearance of the inflatable man caught his attention and gave him some inspiration. Jimmy then started his plan to get himself fired. Since the original editing of the scene was too brilliant, we won't go into too much detail here. Those who have watched it can fast forward to 11 minutes and 28 seconds.
Hi, Jimmy McGill. Jimmy, this is Al Newman of Allied Funeral Homes.
Great to meet you, Al.
Nice time.
Thanks.
What are you doing?
So I'm spreading it around. Did I get you? Comprende?
Dude, I'm from Michigan.
So you don't understand a word I've been saying? What? Good night.
Finally, Jimmy went to a musical instrument store, planning to imitate Clifford's habit of using instruments in the office to relieve stress. As the screeching sound was heard, the scene transitioned to the DM law firm. Everyone was so disturbed by the noise that they couldn't work, and Clifford was finally about to explode.
What do you think you're doing?
I took your advice. I'm blowing off steam.
Blowing off steam.
Yeah, like you and your guitar, you know? I gotta say, you're right. I mean, it really helps with stress. I know I don't sound very good, but I'm just learning. I heard that the key is you have to keep this bag inflated.
Enough! Put that down. Now, I want you in my office. You win.
What do I win?
You're fired. It's about you keeping your bonus. That's what this is about. Been brushing up on your contract law, haven't you? You want out of here, clearly, but you can't just up and quit and expect to keep your bonus. And if I fire you for cause, like I should have done for the TV commercial, again, no bonus. However, if I fire you not for cause, but for being an all-around jackass, yeah, hooray for you.
Hey, Cliff, for what it's worth, I think you're a good guy.
For what it's worth, I think you're an ass.
After days of relentless effort, Jimmy finally achieved his goal. If you find your job boring but don't want to resign voluntarily, you might want to try Jimmy's method. Kim, on the other hand, is completely different from Jimmy. She is scrutinizing her resignation report for fear of using any inappropriate words or phrases. At that moment, just fired Jimmy suddenly visited. He said he had something to discuss with Kim and insisted they go to the conference room. Jimmy wanted to formally invite Kim to start a law firm with him, and he even had business cards ready. Jimmy sincerely invited Kim to partner with him and explained how he had been fired from DM. Kim felt that switching to Rick's firm had more potential than joining a newly established firm. Jimmy argued that even if Kim switched firms, Rick would just be another Howard. This was the difference between working for someone else and starting your own business. Seeing Jimmy's earnest attitude, Kim questioned whether Jimmy would resort to his old tricks if they partnered. Jimmy was about to swear to abide by the rules of the legal profession, but when he touched the ring Marco left him, he decided he wanted to be true to himself.
There's no point in me doing this if I can't be myself. Every time I try to do things someone else's way, it blows up in my face. That's what happened at Davis in Maine. Look how that turned out. I almost derailed your career, pissed everyone off. I've been trying to be the person someone else wants me to be for I don't know how long. And at first it was Chuck, then it was you, and that's not your fault. That was my choice. But if we're gonna do this, I gotta go into it as me. So, yeah, colorful, I guess. What do you say?
I don't see why it's so important to you that we work together. I mean, we're already... Why do you need me for this?
I don't need you. I want you.
Jimmy wanted to bind them together in this way because he feared losing Kim, but Kim stated that she already belonged to Jimmy, so they didn't necessarily have to work together. She then returned to her work. That evening, Jimmy drove his old beat-up car again. Omar helped Jimmy move his favorite rosewood desk into his small office. After bidding Omar farewell, Jimmy's law firm reopened. The first thing he did was record his voicemail greeting.
Hello! You've reached the law offices of James M. McGill, Esquire. Kindly leave.
The high-pitched voice didn't feel right, so after a moment of thought, he recorded it again. This time, it sounded like the real Jimmy. The next day, Kim went to Rick's SC law firm for an interview. It was really just a formality. They were eager to have Kim join if she wanted to. However, as Kim was about to leave, she mistakenly called Rick Howard. Although Rick gracefully smoothed over the awkwardness, it reminded Kim of what Jimmy had said, that even if she worked there, Rick would become another Howard. Kim went to the rooftop parking lot, looking at the business card Jimmy had given her, deep in thought. She then tore the card in half, as if she had made a decision. Kim then went to the nail salon to find Jimmy. Jimmy assumed Kim had successfully been hired by the SC law firm, but Kim gave him an unexpected answer. Kim decided to take Jimmy's advice and start her own solo practice, but she didn't agree to Jimmy's partnership proposal. Instead, they would each have their own practices and split all expenses equally. This way, Jimmy could work his way, and they wouldn't interfere with each other. This was a bit of a surprise to Jimmy, but he was happy with the outcome. Originally, it was supposed to be a flawless heist, but Mike discovered that someone had still died as a result. which crossed Mike's bottom line. What Mike never expected was that Jimenez would also soon meet his end because of this. The heist he planned directly led Hector to go on a killing spree. Mike couldn't bear it any longer, so he contacted the arms dealer again to select a weapon, deciding to kill the damned Hector, although he had retired and hadn't touched a sniper rifle for a long time. Mike hit the bullseye with just one test shot. Then he hurried to the desolate outskirts, locked onto his target, and began waiting for the right moment. After Hector's men dug the pit, the unfortunate Jimenez was pushed out of the cabin, with Hector following closely behind. Mike immediately locked onto his target, but just as he was about to pull the trigger, Nacho blocked his line of sight. Jimenez was shot in the head by the cousins and fell into the pit. Before Mike could find another opportunity to shoot, Hector and the others went back into the house. Mike had no choice but to wait again. Suddenly, he heard a car horn behind him. He quickly put away his sniper rifle and checked the area. What Mike never expected was that the sound came from his own car. When Mike checked the driver's seat, he found that the horn had been propped up with a stick, and there was a note on the windshield that read, "Don't kill Hector, always cautious." Mike realized that his operation had been exposed, yet there was no one around. Mike couldn't figure out who was watching him from behind. Mike's storyline will continue into the third season, although the ratings for these seasons are similar. The third season's plot will be even more exciting, because the most charismatic character from Breaking Bad, Gus, is coming back. Fans, make sure to hit the follow button so you don't miss the exciting episodes to come. Meanwhile, on the other side, Jimmy and Kim, planning their startup, are looking forward to a bright future. Seeing the familiar hot dog stand, fans will definitely recognize it as the place Jesse often visited. Jimmy suggested to Kim that she leave her resignation letter on Howard's desk tonight, so it would count as having notified him. The next morning, before Howard could see the resignation letter, Jimmy asked Kim to contact Mesa Verde Bank's client, because Jimmy knew that if Kim didn't act first, Howard would take the client the moment he learned of Kim's resignation. However, Kim felt this was somewhat unethical and refused to follow Jimmy's suggestion, insisting on doing things her way. The next day, Kim patiently waited at Howard's office door. The busy Howard asked her to keep it brief, but since it was about her resignation, Kim requested to formally submit it in the office. Howard, understanding her purpose, told her to get straight to the point. Kim handed over her meticulously reviewed resignation letter. Howard glanced at the letter symbolically and then directly asked Kim if she was jumping ship to SC law firm, because there are no absolute secrets in this world. Kim quickly retorted that she was going to start her own business. Hearing this, Howard was both surprised and pleased. Howard probably considered that since Kim wasn't joining his competitor, she wouldn't pose much of a threat to his firm. Knowing about Jimmy's dismissal and Kim's voluntary resignation, Howard assumed they had planned this together. Kim didn't deny it. She shared their plan to start a law firm together and promised to repay the tuition fees the company had previously covered for her. Howard generously stated that Kim didn't need to repay the money, considering it a farewell gift from the company. They exchanged a few more pleasantries and then formally said their goodbyes. However, as soon as Kim stepped out, she heard Howard immediately scheduling a meeting with Mesa Verde Bank, confirming Jimmy's earlier suspicion. Hearing this, Kim sprinted back to the office and contacted Paige, trying to secure a meeting with the client before Howard could. In the end, perseverance paid off, and Kim successfully arranged a meeting with the client ahead of Howard. Confidently, Kim suggested that Kevin, the owner of Mesa Verde Bank, choose her. She highlighted her advantages in providing personalized service and assured them that, as their sole client, she would be fully dedicated to their case. Although the negotiation process wasn't detailed in the scene, when Kim found Jimmy, who was in the middle of renting an apartment, she excitedly shared her victory with him. Because Kim was well prepared, she perfectly responded to Kevin's various questions. In the end, while Kevin wasn't looking, Paige gave her a double thumbs up. This clearly indicated that Kevin had decided to entrust the case to Kim. Hearing this, Jimmy was delighted for Kim. Then, they started setting up their new office. Soon after losing the client, Howard informed Chuck about it. Since he had secured an afternoon meeting with Kevin, he wanted Chuck to find a way to win Kevin back. Hearing this, Chuck, disregarding the electromagnetic radiation, decided to go in person. He insisted the office lights stay on, and employees use their phones normally, to avoid giving a bad impression to the client. Colleagues were undoubtedly surprised to see Chuck acting normally. When they met Kevin, the cunning Chuck didn't push for the sale but instead praised their choice of Kim. He claimed that both he and Howard were getting old, and he could only pass the time by reading professional research reports. Although Chuck's words were self-deprecating and complimentary to the other party, he subtly showcased his own strengths throughout the conversation, with Howard playing along. They performed a convincing act in front of Kevin. However, Kevin wasn't naive. He knew they were trying to retain him and expressed his confidence in choosing Kim. Hearing this, Chuck remarked that Kevin should be confident because Kim was trained by them, and no one was more suitable than Kim. Chuck then shifted the tone, saying that as their business expands, Kim alone wouldn't be able to handle the workload. If Kevin didn't choose their firm, they wouldn't take on any future cases from his expanded business. He advised Kevin to reconsider the professional team at HHM. Kevin was successfully persuaded by Chuck and decided to reassign the case to HHM. After bidding Kevin farewell, Chuck could no longer endure the electromagnetic radiation, just because he didn't get the evidence he wanted. The irritated Chuck fell head over heels, which scared Jimmy, who was hiding in the shadows. Jimmy wanted the copy shop employees to call the police, but he didn't dare reveal himself. After a fierce internal struggle, Jimmy decisively rushed into the copy shop. Only he knew how to administer first aid to Chuck. Jimmy turned off all the electrical appliances in the store and found a pillow, then frantically called out to the unconscious Chuck. As Chuck gradually regained consciousness, the look in his eyes seemed to reveal a hint of smugness because Jimmy's timely arrival proved his suspicions correct. A few days earlier, the cunning Chuck had snatched the big Mesa Verde bank case that Kim had secured. This was undoubtedly a huge blow to Kim, who had just started her own firm. As she lost her only client, Jimmy encouraged Kim, saying there would be more big clients and urged her to stay strong. Not wanting to see Kim, who was just starting out, back down because of this, Jimmy decided to help his girlfriend win back the case. He devised a plan, using Ernesto, who had been taking care of Chuck, to ensure Chuck was sound asleep. Jimmy then sent Ernesto home to rest, taking over the care of his brother, while Chuck was asleep. Jimmy began tampering with the Mesa Verde bank documents. He found the relevant documents and marked their positions. Next, Jimmy went to a 24-hour copy shop and started altering the documents. He changed the bank's address from 1261 to 1216, making sure the modified documents looked seamless. Seeing that Chuck was still asleep, Jimmy put the altered documents back in their original places according to the labels he had made. Then he sat in a chair next to his brother and pretended to sleep. Chuck slept until the next afternoon. After some brief concern, Jimmy started mocking Chuck and Howard for stealing Kim's client. But Chuck, still feeling unwell, didn't have the energy to argue with Jimmy because he needed to prepare for the Mesa Verde bank case. What Chuck didn't know was that this would be the most embarrassing moment of his career. The next day, Howard personally came to take Chuck to court. Jimmy hid behind a tree, watching them leave, as he still needed to return the original documents. In court, it quickly became apparent that the address Chuck submitted this time differed from the previous one. Due to this error, the judge postponed the case by 6 weeks. This delay was very costly for the client. Chuck tried to plead with the judge but ultimately couldn't salvage the situation. Chuck couldn't believe he had made such a rookie mistake. He immediately returned home to check the Mesa Verde bank documents and found that the address was indeed 1261. Chuck couldn't accept this reality and repeatedly confirmed that he had seen 1216. Howard tried to console him by saying that everyone makes mistakes, and this very comment triggered Chuck's realization. Chuck realized that his mistake was not that he had misread the address number, but that he had slept too much last night, giving Jimmy the opportunity to tamper with the file.
This was no mistake.
Meanwhile, Kim and Jimmy were tidying up their office. They quickly got the place looking neat and professional. Just then, Kim received a call from Paige. Due to Chuck's blunder, Kevin decided to reassign the case to Kim. Kim was surprised by the unexpected news and shared it with Jimmy, unaware that this outcome was actually part of Jimmy's plan. Jimmy pretended to be completely unaware and celebrated with Kim, feigning surprise. Soon after, Kim received a call from Ernesto, who had been instructed by Chuck to notify her. The call was to inform Kim to pick up the Mesa Verde bank documents from Chuck's place. Kim asked Jimmy to come along and help. However, when Jimmy tried to unlock his brother's door, he found it wouldn't open. It turned out Chuck had already changed the locks. Chuck told Ernesto to go home from work when he saw Jimmy coming. Then Chuck began accusing Jimmy in front of Kim, claiming that Jimmy had tampered with the documents while he was asleep, even bringing up Jimmy's history of forging fake IDs in high school to protect his own reputation and interests. Chuck was willing to do anything. Jimmy countered that if he had altered the documents, there would be evidence. Chuck also speculated that while he was in court, Jimmy returned the originals, which is why he changed the locks. Chuck knew Jimmy all too well and his guess was spot on. If Chuck didn't harbor a deep jealousy or hatred for Jimmy, how could he have guessed so accurately? Moreover, He also figured out that everything Jimmy had done was to help Kim win back the case. Jimmy retorted that Chuck was just bitter about losing the case and thus suspected him. Chuck responded that he couldn't stand being betrayed by his own brother. The ironic thing is that when Chuck said this, he might have forgotten how many times he had betrayed Jimmy. What was even more shocking was Chuck's concern that Kim would be ruined by Jimmy. Chuck's words seemed to be for the good of others, but in reality, he just couldn't stand the idea of Jimmy being better than him. Kim was likely exasperated by now. Faced with Chuck's accusations, Kim asked Chuck if he had any evidence. Chuck claimed that knowing his brother well was evidence enough. Kim knew Jimmy well and believed he was capable of such actions, but she didn't side with Chuck. Instead, she sharply rebutted Chuck, leaving him speechless.
I know he's not perfect, and I know he cuts corners, but you're the one who made him this way. He idolizes you. He accepts you. He takes care of you. And all he ever wanted was your love and support. But all you've ever done is judge him. You never believed in him. You never wanted him to succeed. And you know what? I feel sorry for him. And I feel sorry for you.
Back in the car, Kim was furious with Jimmy's actions. She didn't want to win the case this way. The show then provided flashbacks to explain Chuck's deep-seated resentment toward Jimmy. The first flashback was when Jimmy was bailed out by Chuck and visited Albuquerque for the first time. Chuck's wife, Rebecca, met Jimmy for the first time. Before Jimmy arrived, they had agreed on a signal to end the dinner, but unexpectedly, Rebecca was charmed and laughed heartily at Jimmy's humor. Jimmy has a gift for humor that Chuck doesn't possess. After Jimmy left, Rebecca expressed how impressed she was with Jimmy, noting that he wasn't like Chuck had described. Chuck tried to imitate Jimmy's humor to make Rebecca laugh, but his jokes fell flat, which fueled his jealousy towards Jimmy. Later, when their mother was on her deathbed, Chuck was deeply saddened. However, while Jimmy was out getting food, their mother woke up. She held Chuck's hand but called out for Jimmy, making Chuck feel as though his brother had stolen their mother's affection. Before Jimmy could return, their mother passed away. Chuck never told Jimmy that their mother had called for him before she died. These were some of the incidents that fueled Chuck's jealousy towards Jimmy. That night, as Jimmy was about to sleep, Kim, having witnessed Chuck's cunning, warned him that Chuck would be their toughest opponent, capable of catching even the slightest mistake. Hearing this, Jimmy immediately got up and dressed. He hurried to the copy shop where he had altered the documents. Sure enough, he saw Ernesto, who had been sent by Chuck. To avoid being seen, Jimmy quickly hid. After Ernesto left, Jimmy approached the shop owner, Lance, and paid him a large sum to buy his silence, even purchasing and deleting the shop's surveillance footage. Money talks. When Chuck came back to verify the situation, Lance kept quiet, and despite Chuck's efforts, he couldn't get the answers he wanted. Under the stress of the electrical stimuli, Chuck staggered and collapsed. In this critical moment, Jimmy rushed out from hiding to administer first aid to his brother. Chuck was promptly taken to the hospital. When Chuck woke up, the first thing he did was ask Ernesto how long he had been unconscious, in order to deduce that Jimmy had never left the copy shop. Chuck also suspected that Jimmy had bribed Lance while Ernesto was picking him up. As Chuck passionately explained his theory, Ernesto clarified that he was the one who had called Jimmy. Hearing this, Chuck realized that Ernesto was also helping Jimmy. Furious, he ordered both of them to leave. Jimmy was surprised that Ernesto had helped him. Ernesto confesses that lately Chuck has been sounding like he's out to get Jimmy. Since Ernesto and Jimmy had worked together in the mailroom at HHM and had developed a good relationship, Ernesto didn't want to see his friend bullied by Chuck, so he decided to help Jimmy. In the end, the injured Chuck couldn't avoid the various tests at the hospital, which was torture for someone who feared electromagnetic radiation. While waiting, Kim watched a recent commercial that Jimmy had made. As usual, the ad was excellent. Kim praised the creativity of the advertisement. However, Jimmy turned off his phone because he needed to take care of Chuck and had no time to attend to clients. Fortunately, the test showed that Chuck's health was fine. Jimmy managed to take his brother home. Knowing how uncomfortable Chuck was in the hospital, Jimmy planned to stay and take care of Chuck for a while, but Chuck refused. Jimmy then asked Ernesto to take his place. As soon as Jimmy left, Chuck started his own plan. He took a gas lamp to the garage and found an old tape recorder. Meanwhile, Jimmy welcomed his first batch of clients. Just as he was about to start, Kim informed him that Howard had been urgently trying to contact him. She told Jimmy to call Howard as soon as possible. Jimmy asked Kim to handle the clients for him. When Jimmy finally reached Howard, he learned that Chuck had submitted his resignation, Howard assumed it was all part of Jimmy's scheme. Hearing this, Jimmy immediately went to his brother's house. Seeing the room full of anti-radiation space blankets, Jimmy felt something was off with Chuck. Jimmy tried to persuade Chuck not to resign, but no matter how much Jimmy tried, Chuck remained steadfast. He claimed he was no longer capable, saying he even got a client's address wrong, causing significant losses, and tried to shift the blame to his brother, making himself sound very pitiful. Chuck blamed the damned electric currents for draining his life. Feeling guilty, Jimmy confessed to altering the bank documents.
It was me. I would have made Nixon proud. I changed 1261 to 1216. Exactly. I doctored the copies. I paid the kid at the shop to lie for me. It is insane how you got every detail exactly right.
Are you telling the truth? Or are you just trying to make me feel better?
I am saying it to make you feel better. Sure shit wouldn't be telling you otherwise. I did it for Kim. She worked her butt off to get Mesa Verde while you and Howard sat around sipping scotch and chortling. Hamlin, McGill, more like Scrooge and Marley. Kim deserves Mesa Verde, not you, not HHM. She earned it and she needs it. I did it to help her, but I honestly didn't think it would hurt you so bad. I thought you'd just say, oh crap, I made a mistake, and go on with your life like a normal person. But oh no, wishful thinking.
I'm gonna go call Howard. Jimmy, you do realize you just confessed to a felony?
I guess. But you feel better, right?
This was exactly what Chuck had planned. Unbeknownst to Jimmy, Chuck had recorded everything he had just confessed. Thus, the second season of Better Call Saul came to an end. What will Jimmy do next to deal with the evidence Chuck has gathered? The plot in the third season will be even more exciting. Let's meet again in the third season and not miss out on the action.